Sonic X Episode 15. We start out with Chris giving Sonic a cell phone. He naturally says that this will make things a lot easier, and now Sonic's friends will be able to reach him even when he's on a run. Sonic doesn't explain why he's unenthusiastic, which is probably that if he has the constant anxiety that someone could call him at any moment, he won't feel like he has freedom. And Amy wanting to call him was the last straw. It especially makes sense since he's pretty antisocial in this continuity. I love that Amy wanted to go shopping at least, instead of just wanting to marry Sonic. But Sonic's supposed to be smart. In Archie, he had no problem whatsoever with wearing a wrist communicator, because it was smart. His friends would need to contact him. It is good to have at least some downtime since, yeah, the heroes would want to celebrate the fact that they can go out in public now. I love that Amy keeps changing outfits. I wish she wore those outfits for the rest of the show. But I have no idea why those people ran away from her scared. Why would they be afraid of her? Everyone's staring at Tails too. To be fair, they didn't see Tails on the plane. A woman wonders if a dog trainer taught Tails to talk, and calls him an it, though at least it's in a happy tone. And everyone's still staring at them silently as they sit at a table. It's realistic writing that this is happening, but it's also very annoying since they're clearly being inconsiderate and should know that. I love that Amy is excited at the idea of being on magazine covers and stuff, though they also say that they didn't save the world to become celebrities. I refuse to believe they weren't celebrities on their home planet. Really? How would you not become famous from doing that? Sega Japan really has no idea how to portray Mobius, and all the signs of what it's like on Sonic X prove it. I'd hate to see what they think Mobius is like then, because it doesn't seem to make any sense. Then we see women at a restaurant say that Chris and Amy are adorable, and they grab Tails too. This really doesn't seem realistic. I mean, most people have something called a conscience. They wouldn't act like this, especially not to what they should think are the aliens to save the world from Eggman. They have the social skills, don't they? Finally, something worthwhile happens as some construction workers see something break out of the ground, creating dust everywhere. And it turns out to be a giant drilling machine. Oh, never mind, that would have been interesting. Instead, it's the tip of the egg carrier rising out of the ground, because fuck originality. Makes sense that he would have built it underground to avoid being seen, but he could have built it in a remote area without the hassle of having to dig an underground tunnel just to build it in. Also, where did he get the materials for this thing? I wish we learned that. I can only assume he steals them. And his robot sidekicks already are annoying me by saying that his plans always fail, which is especially annoying because not only is it generic, but their voices are so robotic. Chris reassures his friends that people will get used to seeing them, and then he points out the egg carrier, which realistically is terrifying a crowd of people, complete with menacing music in the background. Though it would have been great if the music was coming from the egg carrier. He says he's going to destroy Station Square and rebuild his headquarters here. That makes sense in that he'd want to use the materials from the destroyed city to build a base easily, and he obviously learned his lesson from when his island base was destroyed. He's better off making a base people don't know where it is. Never mind, he hasn't learned his lesson because he's trying to make a public base here in the first place. This isn't characteristic of Eggman at all. He should be trying to take over and rule this city. It would have been interesting to see how he would rule at least one city in Sonic X, but instead Sonic shows up on the roof just in time. Sonic lures the missiles to Eggman's machines so that it gets destroyed. Eggman shouldn't have made his machine vulnerable to its own missiles, since you'd think this would be a very common trick of Sonic's. Fortunately, reality ensues, as when he runs up a wall to get to the egg carrier, he can't make it and falls. And his friends are more worried about the fact that they need the X-Tornado to get to the egg carrier than the fact that Sonic fell out of the sky and should have been injured. But there's no explanation of how he survived that with no injuries, as we cut to him running from flying machines, which logically should have hit him when they ambushed him. Then Sonic starts riding on top of the flying machine, and Eggman actually takes the advice of his robot for once, as he's told to self-destruct the machine. Somehow this doesn't kill Sonic from an explosion like would be realistic, even though it nearly killed Antoine. When he tries to hang on to the egg carrier, a horrible squeaking sound is heard, which thank goodness Eggman hates too, and he lands on a roof safely and has to run from more flying machines. Thank goodness they had Sonic struggle against Eggman in his epic moment where he was threatening for a change. I wasn't enthusiastic at seeing Sonic show up so early in the episode when he's usually the Deus Ex Machina. Stewart is badass for once, as he uses a handheld mirror to reflect lasers back to destroy all of the flying machines threatening Tails. And Sam says that he's forgetful, adding character to himself. He speeds off with Stewart in the car and reality ensues as he's too cramped in the car to reach his mirror. I really love that he got to be badass. I wouldn't be surprised if Sonic F hadn't adapted this episode because it's meant to be epic and there's no comedy potential. And that's fine because the episode's better off on its own. Tanaka then shows up to save them because he brought the X-Tornado. Well, it's a good thing Chuck taught him how to fly that thing off screen for the sake of being considerate. If only the Freedom Fighters and Archie were that surprisingly smart, Antoine and Sally wouldn't have gotten the fates they did. Tails rescues Sonic on the plane and says that they have to lure Eggman away from the city to save the buildings. So Sonic taunts Eggman to get him to chase him in the egg carrier. Why are the robot sidekicks saying he can't beat Sonic? This is supposed to be an epic scene where he shows how dangerous and threatening he is. Why would you break the mood of the scene like this? Some blaster cannons try to shoot down the tornado, which at least has a good name, and he brags about victory. But then the plane keeps flying anyways, though reality ensues as they're crashing and will lose power in seconds. Seconds have clearly passed, and yet the robots have the time to complain that they need an oil change. Seconds have clearly passed, and yet Sonic saying that after a scene and tells them to fly full speed at the bridge. Sonic powers the plane by powering himself up with rings, and he gets surrounded in a white aura out of nowhere and spin dashes through the top of the egg carrier, causing the bad guys to lose all control. And then the egg carrier explodes, which somehow doesn't kill all of them, and it sinks into the sea, which somehow won't drown them since their ship would obviously have holes in it that water would seep into. At least Tails and Chris are genre savvy as they assume for no reason in universe that Eggman survived this. But realistically, he shouldn't have. Even the random civilian assumes Eggman might win, even though he has no reason to survive this at all. This episode was an epic one, where Eggman threatens Station Square in his egg carrier, after a bunch of uncomfortable scenes where the citizens stare at and even outright bother the Sonic characters, and that ends up being ridiculously unrealistic of all of them at once to behave like that. But filler aside, the plot's pretty good at the tension. The great thing about the show is how well it gets you to find Eggman menacing, because aside from having robots programmed to make fun of him, this is exactly what it'd be like if he invaded the real world with the Sonic characters. And that's with them there to stop him. It's ironic, people made fun of the fact that Sonic 06 was like, what if Sonic was in the real world? Well, that's Sonic X. I also love that Stewart and even Tanaka got to have badass moments where they saved Tails. You wouldn't expect that of boring human characters. And at least it was justified that Sonic took so long to power up with rings to beat the egg carrier this time, because it took until then for him to be on top of the plane with the egg carrier far away from buildings it could destroy, where it would actually be worth it to make it fall out of the sky. But there's no way Eggman could have survived not only his plane blowing up in a giant explosion, but also falling into the ocean where the ocean would obviously sink into the holes created with the explosion and drown him. But somehow he was in the exact right part of the egg carrier that wouldn't be flooded, and managed to survive, and the explosion somehow didn't reach where he was despite how big it was. And yeah, everyone's being genre savvy and assuming he survived this for no reason. That took me out of it. That was just insulting to my intelligence. No one would think he survived this. Maybe Sonic would still have faith because he's fought him for years, and this kind of thing would have happened all the time, but the regular civilian wouldn't.